I will, however, indulge in a brief biblical recital, because I want to begin with a reading from the book of Psalms. So if you could all turn to Psalm 139, unless, of course, you've already committed this famous passage to memory. Verse 7 onwards reads, "Where can I go from your presence? Or where can I flee from your spirit? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths of the Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall guide me, and your right hand shall hold me fast." This poem in its entirety is given by the NRSV a title, The Inescapable God. It's a message of bold reassurance to the believer, reminding them that since God is present everywhere, pervading every inch of our universe, he is, in the happiest sense possible, inescapable. But my first argument, and it's going to be the first of three, against the viability of theism, flows from the demonstrable fact that this divine consolation is seemingly not offered universally, and often in fact restricted from those who want it the most. Far from being unable to escape God, there is a very real contingent of non-believers, and I would count myself among their number, who are unable by any means to discover him, who seek and do not find, who knock and receive, as it were, no answer. This strange phenomenon is known as the problem of divine hiddenness. If there is a God, then simply, why is he hidden from so many of us so much of the time? If theism is to offer a sufficient account of reality, then it must offer an account of what J.L. Schellenberg has famously labelled non-resistant non-belief, which he distinguishes from resistant non-belief. It's sometimes said by a theist who wishes to explain the problem of divine hiddenness that people simply disbelieve through their own fault. They're too stubborn. They're purposefully blinding themselves to the evidence because they don't want it to be true. They're not approaching the arguments honestly with an open heart, and that if they would only do this, then God would surely reveal himself. Such a person would be what Schellenberg calls a resistant non-believer. He disbelieves, in some sense, because he actively resists it. For what it's worth, I do think that such people exist. I think many such people exist. There are people who come to this debate with their minds already made up. There are people who want it not to be true, that God exists, and in fact wouldn't submit to that truth even if it were true. There was a recent poll run by the Atheist Experience YouTube channel, which I know, Jonathan, you're a fan of, which asked, if there was a God, would you worship it? To which an astonishing 85% of respondents said that they would not. There are, however, also people who disbelieve in God, not out of resistance or stubbornness or a hardened heart, but rather due to sheer lack of conviction. Indeed, many such people actively want to be convinced of God's existence and would jump at the chance of entering into a relationship with him if they thought that he did. But no matter how hard they search, they simply find no answer forthcoming from the heavens, and this is the non-resistant non-believer. Formally, then, Schellenberg's problem of divine hiddenness can be stated as follows. Premise 1, if there is a God, he is perfectly loving, something I'm pretty sure Jonathan agrees with. Premise 2, if a perfectly loving God exists, non-resistant non-belief does not occur. Premise 3, non-resistant non-belief does occur. 4, therefore, no perfectly loving God exists, and the conclusion from the first premise is that therefore there is no God. A loving God, like the Christian God, would surely not refuse any willing person from developing a relationship with him, and so if somebody is truly non-resistant and open to receiving God's grace, we should expect them to receive it. Thus, Schellenberg's assertion that if God exists, then non-resistant non-belief does not exist. The question, then, is there such a thing as non-resistant non-belief, a non-resistant non-believer? To which all I can really say is nice to meet you. The last time I debated Jonathan a number of years ago, when I was just a few months out of being a teenager, I said that even if I found Christianity to be true, I still wouldn't want to worship the God that it promotes. I now, since then, have realized how irrational and self-defeating this assertion is, and stand before you today as an example of a non-resistant non-believer. I think it would be great if God existed. I really do. I would absolutely love to escape death. I would relish being the recipient of unconditional love. Less selfishly, I would love to be able to worship that which deserves to be worshipped. I just don't think it's true. Now, try as I might, look where I can, I find no response, no hint, nothing. I don't choose to disbelieve in God any more than I choose to disbelieve in aliens, despite how much I might want them to. So when faced with a psalm like Psalm 139, I'm overwhelmed with a sense not of beauty and consolation, but envy and disappointment. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? Where can I go, I should ask in response, to find it? Of course, you cannot know my heart. You can't know if I'm truly as non-resistant as I claim, but I hope that my actions here might betray me. As a Catholic child, I was once an altar boy. I would serve the altar of Mother Church every Sunday dressed in a white robe. In the time since then, I have, to put it mildly, been looking for God. I went to Catholic schools. I studied philosophy and theology at A-levels. I made a career out of engaging with religious arguments. I have explored arguments from contingency, from fine-tuning, from motion, from mathematics, from irreducible complexity and the alleged resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. It may surprise my followers online to learn that at university I visited numerous churches on the invitation of various friends. I spent hours talking with religious friends until the sun rose again, if you like. I attended Bible groups regularly too, which might surprise people as well. And in fact, I still do attend such groups. Just recently, I agreed to embark on a series of study of the wisdom literature, specifically reading it again in the hopes that this time I might finally feel a divine presence seeping from between the lines. I moved into a house for a year with 2 devoutly Christian housemates, with the express intention of seeing if the obvious truth of Christianity and theism that people like to talk about can be found in the minutiae of daily life. I have looked, in other words, in a great deal of places. I read Athanasius and Anselm. I read Augustine and Aquinas. I looked in Julian of Norwich and Catherine of Siena. I looked at the sociological origin of religious belief in Durkheim and Marx and Freud and Jung. I looked at religious experience in William James and Rudolf Otto. I've looked in the modern works of people like Ed Feser and Bill Craig and Michael Murray and Richard Swinburne and Alvin Plantinga. I've looked in poetry. I've looked in the Psalms. I've looked in Job. I've looked in Ecclesiastes. I've looked in Dostoevsky. I read C.S. Lewis. I listened to worship music. I prayed. I studied the gospel. I even got an actual degree in theology from a university. And nothing, not once, not nearly, not ever, not even briefly have I experienced anything that speaks to the existence of a God in the universe. I think it's asking a lot of any atheist to seriously engage with a religion that he does not believe is true in any circumstances. But I feel like I have gone above and beyond what can be reasonably expected of any atheist who wishes to entertain the God hypothesis, and for my efforts I have been awarded radio silence. The inescapable God of the NRSV, in other words, is for me the invisible God, or the inapproachable God, the deaf, distant God. The best account that I can give of this experience of complete and utter silence from deaf heaven is that all that truly exists to me is impersonal space and air and rocks. I know, it sucks. I'm sorry. It's a shame, but there's no need to cry about it. And nothing more. My question to Jonathan, then, is simple. How can theism account for this lived experience? How can it account, in other words, for non-resistant non-belief? And if atheism, doesn't atheism, offer a better explanation at the very least? Am I a non-resistant non-believer? If so, what offers a best account, or a better account, of such a condition? A universe in which there is a loving God who does want to be my friend, but is for some reason refusing, or hiding, or toying with me? Or a universe without one? Or is there no such thing as a non-resistant non-believer, which is the only remaining option? Do we all secretly resist in some way or other? After desperately, in other words, trying to convince myself of God's existence for years and being left painfully unconvinced, will you just submit, as if to add insult to this spiritual injury, that this is in some way my fault? And if it is, then what could I have done differently? What should I be doing differently? What could I possibly have done differently given the course of my life? Now, assume for a moment, ladies and gentlemen, the alternative hypothesis of naturalism, of atheism, and ask if it provides a good account of non-resistant non-belief. And I think the answer is obvious.